The midday sun scorched the open ground behind Pine Hollow Animal Sanctuary, carving sharp shadows into the dusty earth. Isla Navarro, just 10 years old, stood frozen in horror. Her small frame rigid with disbelief, she stared at a nightmare no child should ever witness. Before her, something unthinkable was happening. A massive python, thick as a fence post, was wrapped in a deadly coil around Bruno, the shelter's oldest canine resident. The senior Belgian Malinois' aging fur was nearly invisible beneath the shifting, scaled mass. The snake's body pulsed with ominous rhythm, squeezing harder with every heartbeat. Bruno's chest had stilled. His tongue dangled limp from the side of his mouth. His eyes were glazed, nearly shut. Isla's own breath caught. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to scream, had to scream, but her throat was frozen, her legs rooted to the earth. Only moments ago, she'd stepped outside to check on her mother's call. Never in 1,000 dreams did she imagine she'd find this. Beside her, Milo, her dog, barked furiously, snarling and lunging forward but holding back, aware somehow that this was no ordinary intruder. Tears welled up in Isla's eyes. "I have to do something," she whispered, hands trembling. But how could she fight something so big, so powerful? Bruno looked gone already. And then, a memory surfaced. Her mother's voice, just this morning. "Isla, if something ever goes wrong, don't panic. Think. Breathe." She blinked, forcing oxygen back into her lungs. She couldn't let Bruno die, not without trying. Milo growled again and took a step forward. Isla knew it in her bones. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Before the chaos, before the panic, the snake, the screaming, there was peace. Isla Navarro had always called the forest home. Tucked in the towering firs of Crescent Valley, Washington, Pine Hollow Animal Sanctuary wasn't marked on any tourist map. It was forgotten by the world, but remembered by every wounded fox, abandoned hound, and orphaned fawn that found refuge past its wooden gates. At 10, Isla didn't mind the seclusion. She loved the chirping of birds in the morning, loved bottle-feeding rescued squirrels, loved doing homework on the back porch while Milo napped under her feet. Each day unfolded in the rhythms of the wild, sun through the pines, the hush of evening winds, the cries of owls echoing at night. She didn't need Wi-Fi or video games. She had freckles on her nose and dirt under her nails, and she wouldn't trade that for anything. While her classmates in town might have been comparing TikTok trends or Fortnite levels, Isla had learned to swaddle newborn possums in flannel and track elk footprints through the underbrush. She once spent an entire afternoon coaxing a frightened barn owl out of the rafters with nothing but a flashlight and a whispered lullaby. That kind of patience, her mother said, could never be taught. It had to be grown. Her dad, Adrian, was a wildlife response officer, always trekking into parks and preserves to help injured animals. He wore boots that seemed to have stories caked into the soles, and Isla had learned early on to tell what kind of rescue he'd been on just by the scent of his jacket. Sap, smoke, fur, rain, it was all part of the language of their life. Her mom, Marina, a retired vet, had always been the heart of the shelter. She spoke in a quiet, clear voice, the kind animals trusted. Even after a bad fall last month left her with a fractured hip and confined to a wheelchair, she remained undeterred. Some days, she wheeled herself from intake to the storage room and back, clipboards in her lap, a pencil tucked behind one ear. Still, Marina stayed busy, logging new rescues, guiding visitors, and coaching volunteers from her post near the office door. Her wheelchair didn't slow her down. If anything, it made her more commanding, more rooted, like an oak whose roots had only grown deeper after the storm. And then there was Milo. No one knew exactly how old he was. Years ago, the young Malinois had stumbled through the shelter gates one gray October morning, looking like a ghost of a dog, ribs like fence slats, a gash on his leg, and eyes full of the kind of sadness that takes years to earn. Isla remembered it clearly. She had just come home from school, and the air had smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. She dropped her backpack the second she saw him. It was Bruno who barked that day, drawing Adrian to the porch just in time to see the pup collapse in the grass. Bruno had always been quiet, the old soul of the place. But that afternoon his voice rang out, loud and purposeful, like a bell tolling for help. Bruno had saved him. Since then, Milo and Bruno were inseparable, two ends of the same story. The protector and the protected, the old warrior and the new recruit. To Isla, Milo wasn't just a dog. He was her shadow, her shield, her heart. He slept beside her bed, followed her through every paddock, and when she cried, he sat silently at her side. They said dogs could smell emotion, but Isla thought it was more than that. Milo didn't just sense sadness, he absorbed it, held it, let her lay her grief in the curve of his ribs and forget, for a while, that the world could be so loud. Life wasn't fancy, but it was full of purpose, full of love. The kind of life where you learned how to hand-mix milk for abandoned kittens before you learned long division. Where you knew the difference between a coyote howl and a stray dog's bark by the time you were 7. Where love was measured not in words, but in warm blankets, healed wounds, and the weight of an old dog resting his head on your knee. It was a quiet kind of joy, the kind that makes you forget how fragile peace can be, how a single moment, one heartbeat, one breath, can tip the scale from calm to catastrophe. No one ever thought that kind of quiet happiness could be shattered by a single escaped python. But in the forest, danger doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes, it slithers in silently, and when it does, it doesn't knock. It just waits, wrapped in shadow, holding its breath until the time is right. It started with a phone call. Adrian Navarro stood on the porch, frowning as he listened to the voice on the other end. His tone dropped into something calm but tense, a tone Isla knew too well. It was the voice he used during wildfires, cougar sightings, emergencies. A python's missing, he said finally, snapping his phone shut. From the Sable Ridge Nature Preserve, the surveillance showed it moving west, toward us. Isla felt her heart tighten. Our woods. Adrian nodded grimly. This one's big, 16 feet. It's probably scared. But if it feels threatened, it could kill. Inside the house, Marina straightened up in her wheelchair, pulling the volunteer roster onto her lap. Everyone's out for lunch, she muttered, scanning the list. Isla, stay inside, okay? I can help. No, Adrian interrupted, gentle but firm. This isn't like cleaning cages or feeding the lambs. This is different. He kissed the top of her head, gave Milo a silent command, and vanished down the dirt trail into the trees. Isla stood by the window, her fists clenched, her breath quick. Beside her, Milo whined, ears perked toward the tree line. Somewhere out there, a massive predator crept unseen. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The silence had weight, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Even the birds seemed quiet. Isla's thoughts spun. What did a 16-foot python even look like in person? She'd only seen them behind thick glass at the Natural History Museum. Once, during a field trip, a docent had shown them the shed skin of a reticulated python. Isla remembered how it had glimmered faintly under the exhibit lights. Fragile, papery, but the length of a pickup truck. One of the boys in her class had laughed and asked, "Could that thing eat a cow?" The docent had smiled politely and answered, "Technically, yes." That yes suddenly felt a lot closer to home. She imagined the snake moving through their woods, silent, purposeful, indifferent, like a living rope threaded with muscle. She imagined it watching from the shadows, choosing when to strike. It could be anywhere. And then, Isla, out here, her mother's voice, urgent, faint, cut through the silence like a knife. Isla spun around. What? How had her mother gotten outside? She couldn't walk. Isla grabbed Milo's leash and bolted through the door. The heat hit her like a blast furnace. The clearing buzzed with cicadas, their trill like a scream stretched thin. Mama. Then she saw her. Marina sat near the gravel path, her wheelchair half sunken into the dirt. Pale, terrified. "Don't come too close," she called, voice shaking. But it was too late. Just beyond her, Bruno lay trapped in the python's death grip. The image seared into Isla's mind. Bruno's hind legs twitched once. His chest barely moved. The python's coils gleamed in the sun, muscles shifting just beneath the skin, like the cables of a drawbridge under tension. The air felt thick, sticky. Her mouth had gone dry. Isla's brain froze for half a second. Then it snapped into motion. "Milo, close," she ordered. The dog obeyed instantly, snapping to her side like a trained soldier. She grabbed the wheelchair's handles and dragged it backward, bumping hard over the patio bricks. Marina winced but nodded. "You need the shock stick," she gasped. "Shed. Right wall. Bottom hook. Remember safety class." Isla nodded, heart hammering so loudly it sounded like a drum inside her skull. "I remember." She sprinted across the yard. Her feet pounded against the ground, dry, cracked earth exploding beneath each step. She passed the old chicken coop, the compost bins, the row of wild blackberries that had taken over the fence line. Everything she knew, everything familiar, blurred around her. The tool shed loomed ahead like a bunker. The door creaked open with a rusty groan. Hot air rushed out like the breath of an oven. It smelled of old hay, rubber boots, gasoline, and iron. She dropped to her knees and scanned the wall. Her fingers scrambled past the halter straps, garden shears, and feed scoops, until finally, there it was. The shock prod. It was longer than she remembered, and heavier. As she pulled it free, it thudded against her leg. Her hands trembled, but she tightened her grip, steeling herself with a silent mantra. "He's still alive. You can still save him." Milo hadn't moved. He stood at the perimeter, tense as a drawn bow, barking in short, piercing bursts. Bruno's breathing was nearly invisible. Isla returned, adrenaline surging. Marina pointed from the patio. "Shock and pull," she said. "Not too close." Isla nodded. Sweat poured from her forehead, stinging her eyes. She swiped it away and grabbed a mesh net from the fence post. Her own idea, born of watching her father handle feral raccoons and panic deer with as little harm as possible. "On three, boy," she whispered to Milo. The dog crouched low, ears flat, body coiled with energy. "Ready. 1. The snake squeezed tighter. Bruno's legs gave one final twitch. 2. Isla crept closer, her arms rigid, the prod humming in her hand like a wasp caught in a bottle. 3. Milo lunged, jaws snapping onto the snake's tail. The python recoiled slightly, instinctively trying to pull away from the sudden pain. That moment of recoil, that fraction of a second, was all Isla needed. She jabbed the prod into the thickest part of the coil and pressed the button. Electricity surged from the rod with a sharp crack. The python spasmed, muscles tightening and then loosening in a rolling shudder. Bruno wheezed, a sound so faint, so soft, it might have been the wind. But it was enough. Isla didn't hesitate. She flung the net forward. The mesh wrapped around the snake's face, blinding it. The thick fabric tangled around its mouth and eyes. The python thrashed violently, but its aim was wild now, disoriented. "Milo, pull," she shouted. The dog dug in, teeth still clamped on the snake's tail, claws churning up dirt as he pulled. Bruno began to slide, inch by painful inch, from the tightening spiral, his body limp, barely moving. It felt like a miracle unfolding in slow motion, like watching a tree fall and rise again in reverse. Every inch felt like defying nature itself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he was free, limp, barely breathing, but alive. Isla collapsed to her knees, gasping, still holding the prod in one trembling hand. The mesh-covered snake writhed, blinded and furious, its heavy body flinging arcs of dust into the air. Milo stood protectively over Bruno, growling deep in his chest, his fur bristling like storm-charged air. Isla looked at them both, her best friend and her childhood guardian, and something cracked open inside her. This was more than a rescue. It was a memory paying its debt, a circle closing, a promise kept between species without a single word. In that moment, with the sun blazing and danger still hissing in the dust, she knew something important. Bravery wasn't loud. It wasn't grown-ups with tranquilizer darts. It was a girl who ran toward danger, a dog who didn't forget, and a fight you chose when running away would have been easier. The python writhed, furious, Its thick coils thrashed violently against the dust, gouging furrows in the earth like ancient scars. The net tangled around its head slipped slightly, but not enough for the snake to regain its sight. Milo stood over Bruno, teeth bared, shoulders low and braced, every muscle taut with purpose. Isla's arms trembled, her knuckles white on the shock prod, the metal catch pole awkward in her other hand. But she didn't back away. "Baby," Marina called, her voice hoarse but steady. "You've got to keep it busy. Milo can't hold it forever." "I got it," Isla shouted back, her voice cracking like brittle glass. The snake reared its body upward, higher than her head now, and for a moment, Isla saw herself reflected in one gleaming eye, dark and unreadable behind the mesh. She darted sideways, arms flailing. "Over here." "Hey!" The python turned, its thick body coiling with jerky frustration. "Look!" Marina called again, urgency sharpening each word. "Animal control pole." Behind the tank, Isla's eyes locked onto it. A long metal rod, looped at one end and half buried under an old tarp near the water tank. She ran. Her sneakers slipped once on loose gravel, but she didn't stop. She grabbed the pole and dragged it across the dirt, dust kicking up in clouds that burned her lungs. Milo barked, a short, sharp warning, as the snake lunged again. He leapt back just in time, teeth snapping. Isla dropped the shock prod just long enough to use both hands on the pole. She slipped the loop around the snake's neck, yanked the handle back, and locked it behind the head in one desperate motion. The python hissed, a guttural, prehistoric sound that made her skin crawl, and thrashed violently again, but the loop held. "Back up slow," Marina called. "Don't let go." Isla nodded and backed away in tiny steps, never loosening her grip, the steel shaft rattling in her shaking hands. One hand held the catch pole, the other had retrieved the prod again. Dust rose around them like smoke after battle. Then, from the trees, crackle, static, voices. Adrian burst from the woods, rifle on his back, 2 rangers at his heels. One carried a med kit, the other a folded stretcher. He stopped mid-stride, eyes taking in the entire scene like a photograph burned into his memory. Bruno on the ground, his breath ragged. Milo standing guard. Isla, sweaty, dirt-streaked, knees bruised, gripping both tools like a seasoned responder. "Everyone okay?" Adrian called out, already dropping to one knee. "He's breathing," Isla whispered, the words nearly lost in the wind. The Rangers moved fast. Years of training kicked in like clockwork. One wrapped a thermal blanket around Bruno. The other began checking vitals and prepping in 4. Milo finally stepped aside, though his eyes never strayed from Bruno. He stood close enough to touch, his nose twitching with worry. Adrian placed a gentle hand on Isla's shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. "You and Milo both." Marina's voice cracked from the porch. "They saved him." Adrian swallowed hard. "I know. Bruno was going to make it. It wouldn't be easy. There would be vet checks, fluids, physical therapy, but he was alive. And that was everything." Isla never left the recovery tent. Neither did Milo. For 2 nights, she curled into a sleeping bag outside the flap while Milo kept his usual vigil, unmoving, eyes fixed on the old dog's breathing. Inside, machines beeped in soft rhythm. The sound should have been cold and sterile, but somehow, it felt like music. A lullaby sung in oxygen and heartbeats. From the clinic doorway, Adrian and Marina watched them silently, coffee cooling in their hands. Marina passed her husband an old photo, edges curled, creased like a well-worn map. In it, a scrawny pup, Milo on his first day, lay curled beside a younger, golden-eyed Bruno. The older dog's muzzle draped protectively over the pup's back, as if claiming him. Bruno barked for him, Marina whispered. He never forgot, and neither had Milo. News of the rescue didn't stay within the gates of Pine Hollow for long. First it spread through Crescent Valley, neighbors sharing the tale over fences, at grocery stores, in quiet gas station conversations. Then local news picked it up. A grainy photo of Isla holding the shock prod ran on the front page under the headline, "Girl and Dog Defy the Odds to Save Old Hero." From there, it went statewide, then viral. Children wrote letters, some in crayon, with backwards RS and misspelled names. Thank you, Milo. Real heroes have 4 legs. Bruno, please get better soon. One envelope came filled with dog treats and a note that simply read, "He's the kind of dog I want to be when I grow up." Donations flooded in. Crates of food, boxes of blankets, chew toys. A woman from Spokane handcrafted a custom orthopedic bed for Bruno. A retired artist painted a stunning portrait of Bruno and Milo nestled together under a tree. The original now hung in the shelter's front office, a print mailed to every major donor. The town breathed easier, softer, kinder, all because a dog remembered. A month passed. Bruno walked again, slowly, his gait stiff, but his head high. He had always been quiet, stoic. Now, he seemed somehow softer, as if time had stretched his patience rather than worn it thin. The bond between the 2 dogs never faded. Milo remained nearby at all times, escorting him to water, curling beside his new orthopedic bed, even nuzzling his hip when the old dog tried to stand. And from their story, something even bigger bloomed. Inspired by the outpouring of support and the deeper truth that emerged from the rescue, the power of memory, of love returned. The sanctuary partnered with the Crescent Valley Parks Department to open a new space, the Milo Center, a place for children and families to learn about animal care, empathy, and emergency wildlife response. It was built right beside the main shelter, nestled beneath the same cedar trees where Milo had once nearly given his life to save a friend. The wooden sign at the entrance read, "In honor of loyalty, memory, and the bonds that need no words." Every weekend, families came to walk the trails. Children played in the interactive learning exhibits. Volunteers gave first aid demos for animals, taught how to spot distress in wildlife, and read stories in the shaded garden. And front and center, leading each tour, her ranger's cap a little too big and always a little tilted, was Isla. She'd stop near Bruno's pen or the shaded path where the rescue happened and say, "That's where Milo saved him." But really, he was just saying thank you. Sometimes, parents would glance at each other quietly. A hand would squeeze a shoulder. A tear would be wiped away. The truth was simple, but powerful. Some legacies don't come from bloodlines or titles. They come from acts, from choices, from love that remembers. As the sun slipped through the trees each afternoon, casting long golden rays across the sanctuary clearing, Isla would linger near Milo and Bruno. No words, just presence. And every time someone asked how she stayed so brave that day, she gave the same answer: "I wasn't alone." If this story moved you, if it made your heart race, your eyes mist, or your soul feel just a little more hopeful, show your love by smashing that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that courage can come on 4 legs and loyalty doesn't need a language. Drop a comment below for Milo and Bruno. Tell us what part of their journey inspired you most. We read every single one, and we promise it means the world. Have your own animal hero at home? Tell us about them. Let's celebrate the quiet guardians, the old souls, and the friendships that change everything. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another true animal rescue story from the wild, the forgotten, and the fiercely loved corners of this world. Because some heroes wear collars, not capes.